Everybody smile. Should we pan the class? Here, everyone look busy. I need a director and different cameras. Don't you agree? Who agrees? Yeah, I got cameras all over the room. I can point and gesture. What is it? Did you have the pile over here? I'll look at your 3 ducks. What is the best duck, by the way?
You should look at the doctor.
Green keels, the best duck. I like widgeons too. What's the worst duck? Pintails. Pintails, you can't trust them. You can't trust a pintail.
Are you going to correct that one little sentence about that?
Oh yeah, we're going to talk. Everyone take that out too. Take out the sentence. We're going to get to it right here in a minute. Everything's taking longer than I thought.
I gave you that yesterday.
Are you serious? You have a 91 in here.
Oh,
I don't even know where I put it.
Okay, so we get to here. Was I talking about this? Did I talk about the color? We talked about slave and so we get to racism and how darker would become evil, light. Did I talk about that? And it's amazing how that comes out of racism. Because I always thought that was just kind of like, dark was uncivilized, white was somehow good or civilized. As it turned out, no, that came out of racism too. And so there's so many things that come out of the system of slavery. So did we get this? Did we get this?
No.
So just to review, we've talked about this once before, but racism is more than just simple. Simple, what a way to put it. But prejudice, laws, social norms, and economics put one race over the other. It is to use the powers of society to put one race over the other. And the important thing to understand about this is, it is used for control, to keep one group on top. Remember the stratified class system? What group really ran the South? What percentage? You remember I told you that? Yeah, that 0.1, because they had how many slaves? Yeah, more than 100. They were the ones who ran things. And it was to their benefit to make sure that poor whites would not fight for political power, because they could always say, you're closer to me because we're white. And racism is an element of control. And yes, it does come from economics. That's part of the reason why racism is so insidious. You can't just simply turn around and say, hey, we don't like, or we like each other now, we're all the same, and come to a group hug. It doesn't work that way.
What's it like I said?
Which is supposed to be his hair. So I talked about these, we talked about what's in the pictures. So, with that is an element of control. So let's get to what this means. It's an ideology. It's an ideology that is a strongly held belief. And this ideology would become a justification. Now, there's a couple things about it. First off, a true ideology is a strongly held belief that no matter what the facts are, it doesn't matter. You believe it and it's true. By the way, belief is a lot more important than truth to most people. Believe it, it's true to you. Remember that whole thing about image back in the election of 1840? You see how that kind of fits in here? And this would become an ideology that justifies slavery. And ideologies are something that people don't change. And for some issues, people really have strong ideologies, regardless of what anybody says, they're not going to change. In fact, they might even entrench more into that position. An example would be if you want to get an argument that you will never win, talk about abortion. People have very strong beliefs in it, and they'll go round and round, and you probably just get mad at each other and fight. I always do got to laugh when government teachers will decide to have a debate about that, and it devolves into yelling at each other. And it's always like, find another issue. Because they'll just start brawling. Don't get me wrong, it's fun to see a fight, but. And so ideology, this would become an ideology. The belief. It says what they want to say. This is a page from that same 1854 journal, and it's trying to fit Hinton Helper's book, but trying to talk about slavery, trying to use something that was brand new, biological sciences. They were just beginning to use, or just beginning to divide animals into species, into groups, and that was brand new into the 19th century. And so they're taking that same idea to people and saying that there are different types of, or different biology between the different groups of people, meaning there are differences between the races. I should add, it's exactly the same time that, what's Darwin's book? Yeah, Origins of Species will come out at the same time. I mean, all this is brand new. And the advantage this gave people, since it's brand new, people had no idea. But boy, does it sound smart. Because they have diagrams, and wow, it looks like what people thought science should look like. And here are the differences between the races, and it shows them on top. On top, Caucasian, white. And look at the skull. That's black, African descent. Look at the skull. That's supposed to be a chimpanzee, I know. But look at the skull. Now, is that true? No, that's not the way it looks. Does it matter? No, they're just trying to prove or give an argument for people who want to justify slavery and that system. They're giving them an argument that's science-y. That's the term for something that sounds like science, but it isn't. It's science-y. Just add a Y. Add a Y. Kind of sounds like science. That's not true. That's not the way the skull looks. The skulls are identical. In fact, what they did is just kind of turned it on its side. You notice that? Just kind of put the mouth out a little bit. So they just drew it a little bit different to look more like that. Fake science, but it gives somebody an argument.
Don't you think people would notice if the African Americans were walking around like snails or whatever? Would be stupid.
If you want to believe something, you believe what you see, then you will see what you believe. Now I'm telling you the truth. You will see what you believe. So it fit in with what they want to justify this. And you know, there are all kinds of different faces. So you can say, well, some faces are more like this, some faces are more like that. By the way, what is that? This is still really funny. You want to know what that is? Yeah, it's statue. It's a picture, a drawing of Michelangelo's David. That's in Florence. And so for white people, they decided to use the head of a statue. Isn't that made out of marbles or rock head? I don't understand that at all. Like they're saying, hey, we're whites are superior because we have marble heads. It's really kind of funny. I think it's hilarious, but it's supposed to be the idealized man. And then look how they draw these two. And you know it's very, very white, right? Donkey. And if you want to wait in a really long line, go see Michelangelo's David. Who doesn't like to wait in line for 3 hours in the hot Italian sun? Nobody in here. Okay, so what is the justification? Ones we've already talked about. We're civilizing them. It is natural. We've already talked about this before, but it's even in the Bible. So Christians can say, I'm going to heaven. The Bible mentions slavery. Does the Bible mention slavery? Yeah, all through it. In the New Testament, it even talks about how, for Christians, the New Testament talks about the proper way to treat a slave. Now, remember what I told you. Slavery was different there. But that doesn't matter. See, it's natural. It's the way things are supposed to be. Someone on top, someone doing the work, that is normal. And we have a hierarchy. Top, bottom. That's the way, in fact, people know their place. And then it works. Look at the economic growth. It's positive and good because people are making money. 60% of the exports almost. If you get rid of slavery, what's going to happen to the nation's economy? At least what would slaveholders say? Yeah, everyone's going to be impoverished. The British will take over, will break up. You're going to condemn people to starvation because you want to get rid of the system that works so well? Oh, sure, we can argue about slavery. It's pretty tough, but it has to be that way to make it work. And you'll hear arguments like that today about when they want to make change, especially on like environmental laws. We have to keep spewing out mercury because that'll make power so expensive and our economy will crash. Which thankfully, they are going to spew more mercury out. Because I am so tired of pregnant women. That's me being facetious. Do you get my point there? It really hurts pregnant women. But, right, it's economic growth. Yeah, they just changed the national rules on mercury. So they're going to spew more.
How does it hurt pregnant?
I'm just breathing some in. What?
How does it hurt pregnant women?
It hurts pregnant women twofold because it hurts the developing fetus, but then because you exchange blood, they have an extremely large amount of mercury going in their system. So it starts accumulating in your bones and spine. So not only does it really hurt the baby, it hurts the woman. So with that, and then who's the villain in this story? Oh, I should add, mercury also makes you crazy. And when I was in 8th grade, I remember my science teacher, Mr. Zazula. It's amazing how I remember every detail of that. But he used to go, mercury is really bad, it'll kill you. But let me show you what it would do. He would dump mercury in his hand. And it kind of like this, mercury's kind of a liquid metal and it moves around. Like, ooh, that's cool. That's good. No, this is really dangerous. Anybody want to guess what happened to him? They had to put him away. Yeah. Oh, it's so fun. Okay, moving on.
You touch that mercury?
It's just weird. I just remember him playing with mercury saying, it will really hurt you and make you crazy. All right, so, with that,
Oh my God.
that's what we call foreshadowing. All right, back to this. Who's the villain in this story? If slavery is civilizing people and it works, who are the villains? Exactly, not all Northerners, but Northerners who want to get rid of slavery, the abolitionists. It's the abolitionists. Slaves would be perfectly happy. They love slavery, except those abolitionists come in and say things like you should be free or slavery is cruel. Slaves like slavery as long as people aren't there to rile them up. During the Civil Rights Movement, Southern politicians would say the exact same thing about groups like the Congress of Racial Equality or the NAACP or the Southern Christian Leadership Council, the group that Martin Luther King was the head of. They're just a bunch of communists who are coming south to rile people up who are perfectly happy. So, once again, history repeats. I mean, echoes, because it's not exact. And so with that, that's, oh my goodness, does that look familiar? What? Who came up with the positive good theory? John C. Calhoun.
Instead of a warning. How could you not see that coming?
So let's look at it real quick. Calhoun wrote this out. Now we just gave you one paragraph, but it laid out exactly what it said. First off, if you anybody have the document out there, it said, the year if you look down the fourth line of it, I feel myself called upon to speak freely upon the subject where the honor and interests that I represent are involved. I hold then that there's never has existed a wealthy and civilized society in which one portion of the community did not, in point of fact, live on the labor of the other. Meaning, all throughout history, what has happened? Someone on top, and what has happened? And what do? They work for them. They work for them. So that's always happened. There's somebody on top. By the way, that means that people on top are what? Better, superior.
Is that true?
No, it's not true. Yeah, there are people who worked on because they had, either had better weapons or were going to kill them if they didn't work for them. But they would say then, we're better because I have weapons to kill you with because I'm better. Makes sense? But no, that's not the truth. He's ignoring the coercion of forcing people to become slaves. He's implying that's normal. And by the way, what's he saying about himself? Now, up here. Remember, he hated the democracy. He hated that idea. He despised it. That's why he left the Democratic Party and resigned, partially because he realized Jackson really did mean that people, at least white men, were equal. And so with that, so this has always happened. So in the North, in the South, in England, in the United States. So if you read that, I may say that the truth in a few countries, so much is left to the sharer and so much exacted, and so little exacted from him. Or there is more kind attention paid to him in sickness or infirmities of age. Implying what happens to slaves. Who cares for them? Look at the last line. Or in fact, read the last part. Compare his condition with the tenants of the poorhouses in the more civilized portions of Europe. And it would be like civilized portion of Europe. Look at the sick and the old and the infirm slave on one hand, in the midst of his family and friends, under the kind superintending care of his master and mistress, and compare it to the forlorn and wretched condition of the pauper in the poorhouse. So, think about slavery. It's natural. One person on top, one person on bottom. So that's natural. Once he said that, and think about the slaves. Who cares for slaves when they're born? The master and the mistress. If they get sick or get hurt on the job, who's there to care for them? If they're too old to work, who's there to care? Oh, did I say that right? Who's old to care for them? Do you get the point there? In fact, look at this right here. Slavery as it exists in America. And look at the slaves. What are they doing? Dancing and frolicking. Why? Because they love slavery. Everybody knows their place. They are supposed to be on the bottom, so they work hard because that's the way it's supposed to be. And here's the master. Oh, isn't that great? And then look at it in England. Slavery as it exists in England. What happens? And first off, what would they call them? What kind of slaves? They're wage slaves. And what happens to a worker if they're hurt on the job? They're fired, and what happens to their family? They starve. If they're too old to work anymore, what happens to them? They starve. If they're sick or their kids are sick, what happens to them? They starve. Look at that cruel system. Look how they treat their labor. They let them starve. Yet in the South, the master and mistress is there to lovingly bring them back to health. In fact, that slavery sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Wouldn't it be nice to have someone care for you like that? By the way, isn't that the truth of exactly what happened? One more thing. He doesn't mean England, and this cartoon does not mean England, or the civilized parts of Europe. That's code. What does he mean? Yeah. Whose class is up there? We know what goes on up there. Whose class is up there? On the very top is Mr. LaRue. I'm not sure which.
I don't know, it's English.
Parish.
Or is it Paris? Yeah, she is. Yeah, she's right there. You're right. They're saying the North. The North, look how they treat their workers. Look at that. And that is the positive good theory of slavery. So what was Calvin's purpose in writing this?
Support slavery.
Not just for slavery. So I mean, a little more on that.
Compare the slaveries and say that the northern slave slavery is worse than the southern and take care of the whites.
Exactly. The northern system is worse. The northern system of wage slavery is worse than the southern system of slavery. And Chris, you had your hand up. Is that kind of what you were?
Yeah.
Did you catch that one? It's more than just protecting slavery. What I want you to do is write that down when you read that. Because the big thing is, I know we just talked about class. But his purpose was not just to promote slavery. It was to promote slavery to show that the northern system was worse. The northern system of wage slavery was worse. And what is his point of view? He is a slaveholder. And what does he want? He wants to justify, he is a person who wants to justify the existence of slavery by saying the southern system is better. That is his point of view. That's what he believes. You know, his purpose and point of view are very close. What's easier, purpose or point of view?
Point of view.
Point of view, you kind of got to get into the person who's writing. Isn't that kind of hard to do? What if it's a political cartoon and you don't know who wrote it? Purpose is a little bit easier. The purpose is to do this. So, last thing on the positive good, or last two things. Let's get back to color. What color? Over there, in the south.
Right?
What color? Black.
It looks gray.
I know it's kind of hard to tell, but in the south, the labor is black, and to positive good theory, that's natural. But in the north, who are these people they're treating so poorly? They're whites. And if you treat white people, who, remember this? Aren't they supposed to be on top? And if you treat white people like this, what will they do? And that's exactly what he said. He is saying that white people will rebel if you treat them like wage slaves. You're condemning society to be, or condemning society to rebellion if, and this is the last part, and you got to get this part down. You're condemning society to rebellion if you spread the northern system to the territories. If you spread the northern system, we will have rebellion. But if you spread the southern system, what will you have? Harmony, peace, because people will know their place. But if you mess up the natural order and treat whites like you're whites like that, rebellion. Yeah, I know. It's hard to get more racist in this argument. But it also therefore fits in the justification. So here's another, this is 1857. These two are talking right here, it's master and mistress, and they say, poor things, they can't take care of themselves. Yeah.
So did Calvin say that to like justify the fact that everyone in the South is scared of slave rebellion?
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that kind of projection? Where's the best chance of rebellion in the United States? Is slave rebellion. But what does he say? Everyone is happy here. It's the North. So it's a projection. You see that a lot. You know, people will have their fault and project it on somebody else. Oh yeah, well you too. And so look at this. Aren't they working in industrious right here? I know it's a little pixelated, but you take away the master and mistress and what happens? Murder, cannibalism, vice. Did they believe this? Here's a better question. Does it matter? All that matters is they now have an argument. And so people who want to believe will believe. And even if you don't want to believe, you have an argument. And this can play on the racism of people in the North, too. Hey, do you want them to be free to come up to Pennsylvania? Racism is pretty insidious. And I say that and don't realize the effect of this. When the Ku Klux Klan started after the Civil War, they went away during Reconstruction. They would come back in the teens in the 1920s. The strength of the Ku Klux Klan was not in the South. It was in the plains in the Midwest to keep blacks from moving there.
How come all the white slaves are like smaller than all the other?
Oh, bad diet. So this is where you get the Gone with the Wind there. The Gone with the Wind, even know what Gone with the Wind is? Anyone know? It's a very famous book by Margaret Mitchell. They would make one of the greatest movies of all times, called Gone with the Wind. And if you got like 5 or 6 days to spare, it is a good movie, but it's 4 hours long. And they got the 1930s style, even though it's colored. It's pretty cool how they did that. But it's long. But in the book, slavery is a paradise. The South is wonderful. The heroes are the masters and mistresses. How did slaves feel about slavery in the movie and the book? They love it. They're so happy. In fact, in Gone with the Wind, the villains are the North and Union soldiers. Those are the villains. The United States are the villains. And this is the romantic classic. So many people would believe it's the South, this idyllic vision of just loafing around. Always got a steamboat. Here's another one. The old plantation home, this idealized South, where there's, see, you notice they have this big mansion, but look at the slave quarters. And you got curtains, got a banjo, they're singing and dancing. That slavery sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Who's with me on that? Yeah. So in practice, this is what they try to portray it as, dancing, and this goes on to this day. How many people do this and they don't even think about it? This was a kid's book that was sold at Mount Vernon, George Washington's home, yes, with the slave quarters, and they quit selling it just a few years ago. Yeah, we're making a cake for George Washington. Who are they? They're slaves. And it's just, oh, we're just so happy. Yay, I love slavery. That's pretty horrific. And it doesn't say in the book, because I read it, it's a really complex book for 5-year-olds. So a lot of plot twists. No, just talk about making, it doesn't say anywhere that slavery is good or bad. It just portrays it as this happy servants. And that will just kind of dig in to people's minds. The reality, hell. Most slaves lived in little hovels. They would construct them themselves, no masters or mistresses. Dirt floor, one pair of clothing they would make called homespun every year, a diet of maybe corn, gruel, wheat, protein, very little animal protein, mostly from beans or peas. Potatoes too, but not much protein in potatoes. So they're always going to be hungry. In fact, that's one of the things I always talk about slaves. Hungry all the time. Especially if you don't have protein, you're hungry and you're tired. And just absolute misery. And this is right after the war. This is in the South. But I thought this was just a great picture in front of their old slave quarters, which they had to make out of sod. And I love the fact that they gave the dog the seat. And doesn't the dog look like it's the skinniest thing ever? That's a black spot.
Oh.
But it makes it look like it's nothing but like just a spinal cord. But the reality was hid from people. You go to these plantations today, and in fact, some of the tours are really gone with the wind garbage. Some are really good, but the slave quarters, little hovels, are right behind. It's pretty. I would highly recommend going to Mount Vernon. Some of you might have gone there, but George Washington's home is right near Washington, D.C. It's a really interesting place. It's really cool. But the slave quarters are right behind. So this hidden history, the reality was hid. And how do these systems function? Terror. The whole system of slavery is based upon terror and coercion. For anything, slaves can be beaten or murdered if this master wanted. Of course, they would rarely do that because of their money. But just for a cross look, you could be beaten to death. It was all up to the whim of the master and or overseer. But don't forget the quota. You don't meet your quota, you're beaten. And if you do meet your quota, what do? Raise the quota. Keep pushing out more. And so here, this is actually from they call them plates, illustration plates. They used to call them that in books, Uncle Tom's Cabin. They're whipping the daughter, whipping the mom and the father with this. This is another one they would do. A lot of, especially by the 1850s, they make a big deal about, we don't use the whip that much. We're more gentle here. We're not near as cruel. Jefferson Davis was a real example of that. We're not cruel. Yet if they didn't meet their quota, they'd be put in stocks. And that's how that stayed for every night. And so stocks try to lay like this. You think, well, that can't hurt that bad. Think about your legs at a weird angle and you can't move them. How bad your knees and especially your hips would hurt. I guess the pain is just unreal. Just unreal. So it's another form of torture. We're not whipping them. We're just torturing them in another.
Wouldn't they be able to work faster if you didn't torture them?
That's not the point. You torture them, what do the other workers do? Yeah.
I don't understand this one.
You don't understand? Here, I'll show you.
You do it.
This will not hurt me much, but put the legs in there.
Would they be that tall?
Well, this one's for neck, for head, and arms.
Can you fit your neck in there?
Huh?
Can someone fit their neck in there?
We'll take it. The first person who made that, in fact, we made torture devices when I used to teach Western Civ. This is 8 years ago. I mean, before I had too many AP US history. Well, no, actually I had to take AP Euro. And then I had too many US history classes. But I had to make torture devices. And he made a torture. I had a bunch of torture devices. It was pretty funny. But I kept that.
Especially.
What? Eventually they weren't very well. And they got, used. But no, most of them just got used room away eventually. But the person who made that, he based it on his own neck and hands. He's a sophomore, and it was right before his big growth spurt. And so it's pretty tight. And it's pretty funny. He had his growth spurt. He just graduated from the Air Force Academy. Guy made that. Just graduated last year. So with that, that's I even thought about going on the graduation. Good guy. But here's another whipping. Water torture would be used. In the 1980s, Israel would change the name of this because they didn't want to admit they were torturing people. What did they call it? Waterboarding. Yeah.
Oh, that's how they do it?
Well, you do it two ways. You can have it sit and you drop water on like that, or you lay down and drop water on the face. It's the water torture to simulate drowning. Well, they can do that, but they don't have to. The thing about the towel is you don't really see the water coming, so it can make it worse, but it also keeps some of the water out. And the towel's wet, so even if they're not dumping water on it in mass, then you're drowning. And this is a Union soldier. So beginning in 1863, the United States began to actively recruit almost all former slaves. And that would be decisive for the victory of the U.S. 1 out of 10 Union soldiers would be former slaves. So decisive for the victory of the U.S. But this is in New Orleans. It's in New Orleans, and the doctor, they do a quick physical. Can you guess what the physical was in 1863? Teeth and you're breathing. Move on. But they had the shirt, squirrel, had his shirt off, and he saw these scars. And he was beaten severely. And you know what it was?
Wait.
It was a whip, but you know why? He wouldn't meet his quota. He said, go to hell, I'm not going to do it. They beat him, and he wouldn't do it. That was his way to fight back, but it's a pretty tough way. I can't even wrap my mind around it. But fight back. Because as it turned out, some slaves didn't like slavery. So with that, here's got more things. If they run away, see this big iron cuff? They would put it, and it hurt really bad because you have it on. You imagine having a big iron. That's like 30 pounds of iron on your neck, bolted there all day and night. Can you imagine how bad your neck would hurt? And then those prongs, can't run away with that, can you? So if someone tries to run away, they stick that on.
Why can't you run away?
How could you run away? Carrying 30 pounds of iron, you can't go on roads if you're running away, so you have to go through the forest or over and under fences. Can you have that on? And then this is another one. This woman tried to run away. They put this big iron apparatus on her head of bells, which had to hurt like you can't. Can you imagine having 30 pounds sticking up like that? This is all a torture. Not just the punishment for running away, but it's a symbol to everybody else. Same deal. The mask for arms like that. Those they bolt to your ankles so you can't run. It's horrible. The whole thing operated on terror. The threat of immediate torture. Immediate. And so, there's another thing about slavery that people sometimes don't talk about, but it's so big and it's lasting to this day. There was a division of labor. Field hands, household help. Now, notice I put help. They're slaves. But which one were treated better? Yeah, they're the ones caring for the kids, making the food. Yeah, they're closer to the master. They're going to be treated a little better, you can imagine. With the field hands, that quota system requires cruelty on top of cruelty. But there's another thing. Think about the household help. Huh? Say it again. All the time. All the time. Most of the women are raped most of the time. It's a household help. Rape is constant. Constant. So that means, let's put it in very blunt terms, who's going to have lighter skin? Because they're part European. Yeah. So you might have relatives of the master as the household slaves. Remember the fornication laws? They're being raped all the time. That's one thing about people who are descendants of slaves in the United States today. Virtually all of them have European and African ancestry because of this. Virtually all of them do, because it's so pernicious. And so you have that issue. Okay, the rape and the hell of that, the household help will treat it better, but it's still awful. But better. And they're lighter skinned. Remember the color. Pretty soon you can imagine what happened. We're treated better because we're what? More white. And they've got excuse me, kind of a racism within the slaves themselves. The lighter colored slaves thought they were superior. And that would go on long after the Civil War, arguably through today.
So
They're closer to white, yeah.
what would they do with people who were like mostly white but a little bit black?
Remember the fornication laws. If your mother's a slave, you're a slave. So there were slaves that looked European completely. Slaves. In fact, they had a name for it. It's called yeller. You ever heard the term mulatto? That was in Spanish colonies, European and African. In the South, they called it yeller because they thought that the tint of the skin was more yellow if it's European and African together. But yeller. And that's what they are, yeller. And they would talk about this. Has anyone ever heard the state song of Texas? It's called the Yellow Rose of Texas. It's originally the Yellow Rose of Texas. And it's about some young men, obviously white men, leering at a female slave. Basically talking about raping a slave. And that's the state song of Texas. They changed the words, so now it's just kind of this bouncy, actually kind of cheerful little tune. There's another really famous song in Alabama that was almost their song was the Yeller Rose of Alabama. So it's amazing they would write songs about this. But doesn't that kind of make it almost kind of like funny and humorous? And so with that, another form of racism, but the worst part that slaves said was the lack of free will. This was them looking back, interviews with slaves years after the war. Yeah, slavery was horrific, the beating was awful, but the idea that you could not even control your own life. They could beat or murder or break up your family, do anything they want, including rape. And that's why I put for sale signs. Because they could sell you at the drop of the hat or sell your mother from your children at the drop of the hat to make profit. By the way, doesn't that throw that whole civilizing thing out the window? Here's another one with selling children from her mom. Here's a slave market. This is one thing I told you about how they used to put turbans on anybody from Africa for reasons that aren't clear. And then here is a slave in 1856 or 1857, stripped naked so they could go through and look at, see if they have any whips and check them, or whipping marks and check them. The more whipping marks, the less likely they were to meet their quota. Remember that? So that all fits together. This idea that you're nothing but a piece of meat or like a cow or a dog. And so this domestic slave trade would be, they'd have these copies of, they call them that, these lines of slaves. Oh shoot, I want to do one more thing. By the way, it says passing the capital, and I don't know what capital they're referring to. It's the capital. All right.
Do you want to tell me this?
No, just hold on. The big thing I just want to make sure you're right in the clock. So I'm going to throw you in the hallway, Justice. And there should be a desk out there. There you go. You have paper and everything. All right, good. By the way, a spam email went all through the school. We have all these alerts. Don't open the email. And then the next one, if you did open it, call us immediately. I'm going to hand out the thing on how to write a document-based question before you leave. So look at it. Just kind of look at it. I put that. That's actually for next week. I just wrote it up so I wouldn't forget.
What is the next week?
A little bit of reading and then learn. And the thing how to write it.
Fear. I like to say crisis. Fear of God.
Fear flamingos.
Flamingos.
It was
Yes,
so. Did you get your baby pause? I did get.
All right, somebody didn't finish. Oh, I like how you blame the bell.
It's time for the Iceman.
Everybody smile, last minute.
I'm gonna get on my. What have you gonna call for the day? I got me a bud. Give me a bud. The try put me on the cover of the boat.
That's all.
Every day. Monday.
We're ending the stream, people.